The Devils, 1971. The banned horror masterpiece that's still too shocking to release. Introduction. The film they don't want you to see. Imagine a film so controversial, so boundary-shattering, that more than half a century after its creation, it remains partially suppressed by its own studio. A film that dared to expose the darkest intersections of religious power, sexual repression, and political corruption. A film that the Vatican itself condemned. Today we're diving deep into Ken Russell's 1971 masterpiece, The Devils. A work so explosive that even now, in our age of seemingly unlimited content, you still can't legally watch the director's complete vision. But what makes this film so dangerous? What scenes were so disturbing that they've been hidden from public view for decades? And why is this banned horror classic perhaps more relevant today than ever before? Stay with me as we uncover the shocking truth behind one of cinema's most controversial creations. The Unholy Vision, Russell's audacious masterpiece. In the landscape of 1970s cinema, when boundaries were being pushed in all directions, The Devils stands as perhaps the most daring artistic statement of its era. Based on actual historical events that took place in the French town of Loudun in the 1630s, the film tells the story of Father Urbain Grandier, portrayed with magnetic intensity by Oliver Reed in what many consider his finest performance. Grandier was no ordinary priest. Charismatic, politically outspoken, and openly defiant of religious celibacy rules, he found himself at the center of a perfect storm of religious hysteria and cynical political maneuvering. When Cardinal Richelieu and King Louis XIII sought to centralize France's power by destroying the autonomy of walled cities like Loudun, Grandier became their perfect target. But what transformed this historical drama into one of horror's most controversial works was Russell's unflinching portrayal of Sister Jeanne des Anges, the hunchbacked Mother Superior of the local Ursuline convent. Vanessa Redgrave's performance as Sister Jeanne is nothing short of extraordinary, a woman whose physical deformity and sexual repression manifests as an obsessive, hallucinatory desire for Father Grandier. When Grandier rejects her advances he isn't even aware of, existing only in her tortured imagination, Sister Jeanne accuses him of consorting with the devil. What follows is a domino effect of mass hysteria, with the entire convent of nuns falling into what authorities deemed demonic possession. But what modern viewers might recognize as a toxic combination of religious fervor, sexual frustration, and manipulation by powerful men. Russell wasn't simply adapting history, though. His primary sources were Aldous Huxley's meticulously researched historical account, The Devils of Loudun, and John Whiting's play, based on Huxley's work. Through these foundations, Russell crafted something unprecedented, a film that used horror elements not merely to frighten, but to expose the terror of institutional corruption. What separates The Devils from conventional horror is its unwavering gaze at real human monstrosity. There are no supernatural elements at work in Loudun, no actual demons or possessions. The true horror lies in what humans will do to each other in the name of faith, power, and suppressed desire. This approach makes the film not just shocking, but philosophically challenging in ways that mainstream horror rarely attempts. The production design by Derek Jarman, who would later become a celebrated director in his own right, creates a visual landscape that's simultaneously historical and eerily modernist. The stark white walls of Loudun contrast with the grotesque torture devices and religious iconography, creating a dreamlike atmosphere where the lines between divine ecstasy and sadistic torture become disturbingly blurred. The burning controversy, censorship and suppression now. Let's address the question that makes The Devils legendary in film circles. Why can't we see it as Russell intended? What exactly happens in this film that warranted such unprecedented censorship? From the moment the British Board of Film Classification, BBFC, first viewed The Devils, it was clear that Russell had created a work that would test the very limits of what cinema could show. The censors immediately demanded extensive cuts, focusing particularly on scenes combining religious imagery with sexual content. The most infamous of these censored sequences is known as the Rape of Christ scene. During the film's climactic witch hunt, the nuns of Loudun fall into what the church authorities deem a mass possession. Under the influence of a suppression drug administered by politically motivated exorcists, the nuns engage in a frenzied orgy in the church. The sequence culminates with them pulling down a life-sized figure of Christ from a crucifix and sexually desecrating it while church officials look on, some in horror, others with obvious pleasure. This scene wasn't gratuitous shock value. It served as the visual culmination of the film's central thesis about how power corrupts religion and how sexual repression can twist into violent expression. Nevertheless, this sequence was deemed so blasphemous that it was completely removed from all versions of the film upon release. But the censorship didn't stop there. Another heavily cut sequence shows Sister Jean masturbating with a charred bone she believes to be from Grandier's burned body. Additional sequences showing torture of Grandier, including a graphic bone-breaking scene and the final immolation, were significantly shortened. A scene depicting King Louis III participating in a debauched royal shooting gallery where naked women pose as targets was also heavily edited. Despite these cuts, the film still received an X rating in Britain and was outright banned by many local authorities who had the power to override the national certification. In the United States, Warner Brothers demanded even more extensive cuts to secure an R rating, resulting in a version that Russell himself described as incoherent and nonsensical. The Vatican's newspaper condemned the film as blasphemous and sadistic, while the Catholic Legion of Decency placed it on their list of condemned films. Such religious pressure likely contributed to Warner Brothers' decision to essentially bury the film after its initial release, treating it as an embarrassment rather than the artistic achievement many critics recognized it to be. What's truly remarkable, and what I'm about to reveal, is how systematic and complete the suppression of this film has been. For decades, Warner Brothers not only refused to release an uncut version, but actively worked to prevent screenings of the film in any form. The studio repeatedly claimed that the original negative containing the censored scenes had been destroyed or lost. But were these materials truly lost? Or was something else going on? The answer would remain a mystery until the early 2000s, when an unexpected discovery would reignite interest in Russell's suppressed masterpiece. The Lost Footage, a cinematic detective story in what amounts to one of the great detective stories in film preservation history. BBC film critic Mark Kermode spent years searching for the missing footage from The Devils. His persistence paid off in 2002 when he made an astonishing discovery. Contrary to Warner Brothers' claims, much of the censored material, including the complete Rape of Christ sequence, had been preserved in the studio's vaults all along. This revelation came when Kermode was working on his documentary Hell on Earth, which chronicled the troubled history of The Devils. While researching at the Warner Brothers archives, he stumbled upon film cans labeled with Russell's name. Inside was footage that hadn't been seen by the public since the film's original submission to censors in 1971. Kermode's documentary featured this recovered footage, providing the first opportunity for audiences to glimpse Russell's complete vision. The rediscovered Rape of Christ sequence proved to be exactly as described. Shocking, yes, but also artistically integral to the film's themes and narrative structure. As Russell himself stated when seeing the footage again, "It was never about shock for shock's sake. Every frame serves the story." With this discovery, pressure mounted on Warner Brothers to release a complete restored version of the film. In 2004, there seemed to be progress when the studio authorized a new restoration and transfer of the film. Film restoration experts worked meticulously to reintegrate the censored scenes, color-correct the footage, and enhance the audio quality. A full director's cut was prepared, approved by Russell himself before his death in 2011, and then nothing happened. The restoration was completed but never released. Warner Brothers continued to cite content concerns and questions about commercial viability as reasons for withholding the film. This decision came despite petitions from film scholars, critics, and a growing cult audience who recognized the film's artistic significance. In 2012, the British Film Institute, BFI, released a DVD version containing the 111-minute UK theatrical cut, more complete than previous home video releases, but still missing significant footage. This release included some documentary materials, but not the fully restored version that continued to sit in Warner Brothers' vaults. The question remains, what are they still afraid of? In an era where extreme content is readily available across streaming platforms, what makes The Devils, a film now over 50 years old, still too dangerous to release in its complete form? Beyond horror, the film's artistic legacy, despite, or perhaps because of, its controversial history, The Devils has secured its place as one of the most influential works in the evolution of horror cinema. Its impact extends far beyond simple shock value, reaching into the very definition of what horror films can accomplish as artistic and political statements. Let's examine how this suppressed masterpiece has shaped the landscape of cinema in the decades since its release. First, The Devils pioneered a form of historical horror that uses genuine historical atrocities as its foundation. Rather than inventing supernatural monsters, Russell found true horror in documented human cruelty. This approach influenced films like Michael Reeves's Witchfinder General, 1968, which Russell's film took to even greater extremes and can be seen in modern works like Robert Eggers' The Witch, 2015, and Ari Aster's Midsummer, 2019. Second, the film's unflinching examination of religious corruption and sexual repression opened new thematic territory for horror cinema. While earlier films had certainly touched on religious themes, The Devils dared to suggest that the institutions of religion themselves, not just corrupted individuals, could be sources of true horror. This critique would later be developed in films ranging from The Exorcist, 1973, to more recent works like Saint Maud, 2019. Third, Russell's visual approach, combining historical accuracy with surrealistic, dreamlike imagery, established a new aesthetic vocabulary for horror. The stark white walls of Loudun, designed by Derek Jarman in a modernist style that deliberately contradicted historical accuracy, create a timeless, universal quality that allows the film to transcend its specific setting. This visual boldness influenced filmmakers from David Lynch to Guillermo del Toro. Perhaps most significantly, The Devils demonstrated how horror could function as political allegory. The film was made during the Vietnam War era, and Russell's portrayal of authorities, using false accusations and fabricated evidence to pursue political goals, carried obvious parallels to contemporary events. This politically charged approach to horror would later be adopted by filmmakers like George Romero, whose Dawn of the Dead, 1978, used zombies to critique consumer culture, and Jordan Peele, whose Get Out, 2017, explored racial tension through horror conventions. Critics who initially dismissed The Devils as mere provocation have largely revised their opinions. Martin Scorsese has cited it as a major influence, calling it one of the most honest films ever made about religion. Film scholar Mark Kermode considers it the greatest British film ever made. Director Guillermo del Toro describes it as a perfect film, formally, narratively, visually. But perhaps the most compelling testament to the film's power comes from audience reactions at the rare screenings of the more complete versions. Viewers frequently report being not just shocked, but profoundly moved by the film's unflinching portrayal of human cruelty and its underlying message about the dangers of unchecked institutional power. The cultural relevance. Why The Devils matters now. As we look at The Devils from our contemporary perspective, what's most striking is not how outdated it seems, but rather how prescient Russell's vision appears. In an era of religious nationalism, institutional abuses of power, and ongoing battles over censorship, this 50-year-old film feels uncomfortably relevant to our current moment. Consider the film's central theme, the weaponization of moral panic to achieve political ends. In Loudun, accusations of witchcraft and demonic possession served as convenient tools for authorities to eliminate political opponents and consolidate power. The parallels to modern moral panics, whether about immigration, gender identity, or various forms of artistic expression, are difficult to ignore. The film also explores how sexual repression creates psychological distortions that can manifest in destructive ways. Sister Jeanne's unfulfilled desires transform into hallucinations and false accusations, while the other nuns' suppressed sexuality erupts in what authorities interpret as possession. This psychological insight remains relevant in ongoing discussions about healthy approaches to human sexuality versus repressive systems that often produce unintended consequences. Perhaps most pertinently, The Devils stands as a monument to the ongoing battle between artistic freedom and various forms of censorship. In an era where content is increasingly controlled by a handful of massive entertainment conglomerates, the continued suppression of Russell's film by Warner Brothers raises uncomfortable questions about corporate control over artistic expression. When Alex Cox, director of Repo Man, and Sid and Nancy attempted to screen The Devils at a film festival in 2013, he was informed by lawyers that Warner Brothers would take legal action if the screening proceeded. Cox later wrote, "The continued suppression of The Devils has nothing to do with its content and everything to do with the precedent that would be set by releasing it. If this film were freely available, what else might audiences demand to see?" This observation cuts to the heart of why The Devils remains important. Its suppression isn't just about one film, but about who controls our cultural history and artistic heritage. As streaming platforms increasingly become the arbiters of what films remain accessible, works that challenge dominant narratives or corporate interests risk being quietly buried, not through explicit censorship, but through simple unavailability. Where to watch, if you can. For those intrigued by this cinematic cause célèbre and wondering how they might experience it for themselves, the options remain frustratingly limited. The most accessible version is the BFI's 2012 DVD release, which contains the 111-minute UK theatrical cut. While this version includes more footage than was available in earlier home video releases, it still lacks significant sequences, including the complete Rape of Christ scene. Streaming availability remains inconsistent. The film has occasionally appeared on platforms like Shudder or Criterion Channel, but frequently disappears without notice. As of this recording, you'll need to check current streaming guides to see if it's currently available anywhere. For those seeking a more complete version, your best option is to watch for special screenings at film festivals or repertory cinemas. Organizations like the British Film Institute occasionally show more complete versions, including some of the recovered footage, though typically with caveats that even these screenings don't represent Russell's full, uncut vision. Mark Kermode's documentary Hell on Earth includes some of the censored footage and provides valuable context about the film's troubled history. This documentary occasionally appears as a special feature on DVD releases or as part of retrospective screenings. What remains unavailable to the public, despite its known existence, is the fully restored director's cut that was completed in 2004. This version sits in Warner Brothers' vaults, a completed restoration that the studio continues to withhold from release. Conclusion: The Devil's Advocate. As we conclude our journey through the fascinating history of The Devils, it's worth asking why this particular film continues to provoke such strong reactions and inspire such dedicated advocacy. Perhaps the answer lies in what Ken Russell himself said shortly before his death in 2011. "I didn't make The Devils to shock. I made it because I believe that the danger it warns against, the marriage of religious fervor with political power, is eternally present. When we allow ourselves to be manipulated by fear of the other, whether that's witches or any other scapegoat, we open the door to genuine evil." Russell's film reminds us that true horror often has nothing to do with the supernatural. The most terrifying monsters aren't fantastical creatures, but ordinary humans convinced of their own righteousness while committing atrocities. It shows us that systems designed to promote spiritual enlightenment can, when corrupted by power, become mechanisms for the worst forms of cruelty. The Devils stands as both a warning and a challenge. It warns us about the dangers of unchecked authority, especially when cloaked in moral or religious language. And it challenges us to question not just the content we consume, but the systems that determine what content reaches us in the first place. For a film that's over 50 years old, The Devils feels remarkably modern in its concerns and its courage. In an era where corporate interests increasingly control our access to cultural works, the continued suppression of Russell's masterpiece isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a living example of the very dynamics the film itself critiques. Whether you view it as blasphemous provocation or profound artistic statement, one thing remains clear. The Devils refuses to go quietly into the good night of forgotten cinema. Like the historical events it depicts, it continues to haunt our cultural imagination, challenging us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, faith, and our capacity for both cruelty and resistance. Until Warner Brothers finally relents and releases the complete version, The Devils will remain what it has always been, a film too truthful for comfort, too challenging for easy consumption, and too important to forget. If you've managed to see any version of this remarkable film, share your thoughts in the comments. And if this video has sparked your interest in film censorship and preservation, subscribe for more deep dives into cinema's most controversial classics.